Hi, I'm Landry from House of Hods, and welcome to my episode. This is the second part of the series on lenses and why and how to choose them. In the very first part, we talked a little bit more about the functional reasons why you want to choose a lens. Now, let's say you've answered all those questions and you want to make some more artistic decisions about how something looks. Well, not all lenses are the same. Like we mentioned, some have compromises over others. For example, these two lenses are Canon 70-200s. One of them is the f4 IS version. The other is the 2.89 IS. They're both excellent, great lenses. But I find that if I were to take the exact same picture with these lenses, the same focal length, the same aperture, you won't get necessarily the same types of photo. Well, the difference might be small, but if you're artistic or if you like a particular thing, sometimes that small little thing really matters. So, the first, probably the most obvious kind of characteristic which can be artistic is the background blur. I kind of like the 2.8 rendition of the background blur, the Bokeh, it's a Japanese word, versus the f4 version. I find the f4 version, it's technically good, but there's just something about it which I don't like. It's not really quantifiable or anything like that. You may want to check out the manufacturer's websites in the specs section about the number of aperture blades a lens may have. That has some kind of correlation to the kind and the way the bokeh is represented. Some of them also have circular blades, which means that no matter what number of blades they actually had, they form a circle. So the actual bokeh and out of focus might be more circular or oval as opposed to like an octagon, which has more distinct sides. What I'm going to try to do back here is simulate some of these kinds of shots. What we're looking at here is a bunch of street lamps taken at 200 millimeters. We're very far away. This is going through my window, so don't mind all the dust and the craziness. We're just basically trying to look at the shape of these lights as they are being blurred out. All the lenses we're using are at 5.6 and at minimum focusing distance, and this is all done to maximize the blur. So the first lens here we're looking at is the Nikon 80-200 AFS 2.8, and what you should really be looking at is the shape of the rings, and also sometimes there's the edge has some other thing going on there. In this case, there looks to be like a secondary outline. Good bokeh is sometimes usually neutral, like there is no other shapes, or we can see that it's very smooth going from its edge to something else. And the reason why this is good is because it's just representative of something which is less distracting. If we go on to the next lens, which is the Canon 70-200 2.8 non-IS, it's a little different because the shapes are clearly more outlined. This is, the lines are much more solid compared to the 80-200 AFS. And for some people, this is cool. For some people, it's not. You have to remember it's a matter of taste. But this is a pretty even looking bokeh. There's no secondary outlines. It just has a clear, distinct shape. Moving on to the next lens, we have the Canon 70-200 f4 IS. In this case, the shapes are really all irregular. Now, some people might like this because it's just some kind of a random thing going on. Some people may not like it because it's not even. There's no secondary outline along the edges. It might be a little bit brighter, whereas the other previous two might have been neutral or a little bit darker outline. But this is what this looks like. And now moving to our fourth lens, the Nikon 55-200 VR, we notice that they really are perfect circles in this circumstance. The reason why this is because this lens is a variable aperture lens. It ends at 5.6 at 200 millimeters. So because this is the starting point, the aperture blades are not really being used. So they are perfect circles. If you decided to use any of the previous lenses wide open, you would notice the same thing. So to see what the aperture blades do here, we really have to stop down. So in the next image, it's the same lens, but with this aperture set to 6.3, which is the third down. As you see, the circle starts being somewhat deformed. And a full one stop down at f8, you can see that the shapes are definitely not circles, and there are distinct secondary outlines around the edges of the circles. So this is also kind of busier background blur. Okay, in the next series of images, we're going to look at a more evenly lit photo. It's something that you would more likely to encounter as opposed to taking pictures of actual light sources. Here we have photos of tomatoes on a tabletop. The reason why I chose to use this particular setup is because it's generally typical of shots which you might take where light is coming from everywhere. This happens indoors and outdoors. I basically wanted to try to isolate one of the rear tomatoes, and in this particular photo I was using the 55-200 VR from Nikon. As you see here, you can definitely tell that there is a slight fall off between the second and third and fourth tomatoes in the front. It gets more and more blurrier. In the next lens, which is the 80-200 AFS, you can see that the effect is really different. The drop off seems to be much greater, and when you look at this photo, the tomato in the rear looks to be much more isolated. Well, like I said, not all bokehs and blurs will be created equally, and in this case I would prefer using this 80-200 AFS to isolate subjects. Now, once again, this is not a difference in how the photo is taken. All the settings in the camera and the lenses are the same. This is 200 millimeter. It's still both 5.6, and this is just a difference of how it renders the image. The next image is from the Canon 70-200 2.8 non-IS lens, and as you see here, it sort of does approximately the same thing. The final lens is its brother lens, the 70-200 f4 IS. If you look at this, there looks to be very, very minimal differences also in this particular test. You might be wondering what kind of lenses you'd actually use for better background blurs. Well, certainly I haven't tried all of them out. I've tried the ones that I figured I prefer those certain ranges or those certain features, those apertures. I suggest you figure out exactly what your needs are, and if you've come down to a couple of lenses, you can search online on websites like Flickr or P-Base and see what other images people have taken with them. And you can just sort of take a global general assessment. You can average out all the images that you've seen in your mind to try to figure out, hey, this is a lens that I kind of like the quality because of this rendition of the image.